narrator in Rachel Howard's novel, The Risk of Us, shares some biographical information with Rachel herself. The narrator, like Rachel, is a writer who has published a memoir about her father's murder, which happened in her family's home when she was 10. Like Rachel, the narrator is a teacher, reminiscent of the one I have had the privilege of spending my Tuesday evenings with the last few months, reading and writing and discussing contemporary creative nonfiction. About halfway through The Risk of Us, we get a glimpse of the narrator at work when she steals away from a family reunion to teach an online class. She says, "This week's lesson is point of view, how a writer has much more license for imagining other characters' experiences than she may think, even when writing from real life. How exercising such empathy can transform a story from a pity party into a spiritual reconciliation with reality." What does that mean? To transform a story from a pity party into a spiritual reconciliation with reality. When I read this, I was not only reminded of my Tuesdays in Rachel's class and how she taught me to pay attention, really pay attention, to point of view. The line also spoke to my experience reading her work. Much of the subject matter in Rachel's writing is undoubtedly and devastatingly difficult. In her memoir, The Last Night, about her father's unsolved murder, the speaker recalls waking up and seeing pools of blood on the hallway carpet while her father clutches his throat. In The Risk of Us, the speaker tries her best to offer unconditional love to a 7-year-old foster child who consistently tests it, hitting and slamming doors and screaming, "Meanie, I hate you, you meanie." The descriptor tantrum, the narrator tells us, does not suffice to convey the oral reality of these episodes to anyone I confide in. Together, these narratives do exactly what Rachel's narrator proposes. They provide a spiritual reconciliation with reality. In The Last Night, this looks like learning to live with the fact that her father's murder will in all likelihood never be solved. Learning to live with all those unanswered questions, with letting the question of who to blame recede. In The Risk of Us, it looks like loving the screaming 7-year-old anyway, like not shouting back, like reminding her, "It's okay, you're safe," even after she claws at the narrator's arms. On our last day of class, Rachel shared a way of thinking about point of view that was specifically aimed at helping us locate empathy for the characters in our stories, real or imagined, even, or especially, our most unlikable or challenging characters. She shared tips for getting specific about our feelings for these characters, discussing how, for example, we might think we are viewing a character with compassion when actually what we are feeling is pity, and how to adjust accordingly. Her commitment to writing with as much generosity as possible is evidenced by the complexity of her characters and the nuance with which she explores complicated topics and themes across genres. It makes me think about how, if we get in the practice of extending empathy to our characters on the page, we might find ourselves better equipped to extend it to the people in our lives. We have so much to learn from Rachel and her work. Rachel Howard is a 2024 National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellow whose fiction and nonfiction has been published in StoryQuarterly, the New York Times Magazine, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Zyzzyva, and more. For more than 20 years, she has also written dance criticism, primarily for the San Francisco Chronicle. She studied at the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College, where she later served as Joan Beebe Teaching Fellow and Interim Director of Undergraduate Creative Writing. Please join me in welcoming Rachel Howard.
I'm so grateful for that most beautiful introduction I've ever received. Thank you. I've been getting kind of teary-eyed over the last week as final end-of-term reflections are coming in for my students, and that brought it all back. And I'm so grateful for this term here with these wonderful writers in this community. It's been a real honor to be entrusted to be part of such a beautiful community. I usually read from more recent work, and this is going to be a little different because I thought it over and I kind of took a tip from the prompt that said that this event was going to lead you through my life and work. So I'm going to read a little bit from each of the books, which is also a little humbling because it's like revisiting past selves. So I'll start with The Last Night. That was my first book. It came out in 2006, and I wrote it between the ages of about 23 to 27. And I did try to write it first as a novel when I was an undergraduate. And I had studied literature as an undergraduate, but I had not done an MFA program yet when I wrote this book. But I had a really wonderful writers group I was part of in San Francisco with a novelist named Anne Marino, who was a good friend of mine. She taught at CCA, and she wrote a wonderful novel called The Collapsible World. And I remember showing up at that writers group, and she was looking at me kind of skeptically, like, "You're writing a memoir?" And then I said, "Well, my father was murdered in our home," and she just gave me a big hug, and she said, "Okay, honey, you get to write a memoir." And she just had a beautiful generosity, and I miss her very much. She died about 6 years ago. No, it was more than that now. Gosh, it's hard to believe. Okay, so this is the prologue from that book I wrote in the writing group, The Last Night. I saw my father clutching his throat, trying to speak. That image taunted me as I walked into the Merced County Sheriff's Department one sheltering August day. I'd come to meet with the detectives assigned to my father's murder, though discussing his death with anyone, let alone the authorities, still made my throat constrict and my right eye twitch. Whenever anyone asked about my father, I replied in a flat, neutral voice, "My father was murdered." I hoped to stop the conversation cold, and usually I succeeded. But sometimes the questions persisted. "How old were you?" I was 10. "God, I'm sorry. Can I ask what happened?" If I felt strong, if I felt I was dealing with a straight shooter who wouldn't coo with pity, I might push myself to continue. I'd tell of waking up that summer night and seeing pools of blood on the hallway carpet. I'd describe my father standing inside the darkened bedroom doorway, one hand clenching his throat. I might say he'd been trying to say something to me, his mouth moving soundlessly as he bled, even though I could not swear upon it. This was the trouble with talking about the murder, the reason I usually blunted the topic. The moment I saw my father clutching his throat was just one among so many details I couldn't verify. Some details remained in doubt because I'd never worked up the nerve to check them out. Others, things I'd seen with my own eyes, lay obscured because for 16 years I'd let them fade like an intense and illogical dream you try to shake upon waking. The only facts I held with certainty were these. At about 3:30 a.m. on June 22nd, 1986, someone entered through an unlocked sliding glass door my father's house on the outskirts of the Central California farming town where he had grown up. The intruder took a knife from the kitchen and stabbed my father as he lay sleeping next to his third wife. He was pronounced dead at the hospital an hour later. He was 32 years old, a handsome, laid-back guy who loved weightlifting and the Three Stooges and Rod Stewart songs, and who seemed to have no enemies. No one was ever charged with the crime. Beyond this, fact dissolved to suspicion. My father was married to his third wife, Sherry, for just over a year. I never met her brother, Steve, but I heard my grandparents refer to him in mysterious, bitter outbursts. I'd been left to wonder whether Sherry had conspired in my father's death, and I'd done so fleetingly in the privacy of my own mind, never daring to talk to my family about what happened. Finally, in my mid-20s, I began writing about my father, reclaiming moments from our summers together, trying to bring the years before his death into focus. But when I thought of describing the night of his murder or the way I'd felt afterward, my mind stopped short like a horse at a tall fence, unwilling to cross into territory I wasn't sure I could return from. The story of my father's death was half complete because I'd been too afraid of what I might remember and because I hadn't lived the end of it. Now I was ready, and I had a guess as to why. 3 days before my appointment with the detectives, I joined my boyfriend Bill on a visit to his family. We sat around the dining room table with his siblings and parents playing Scrabble and trading jokes as the night grew darker. Finally, Bill glanced at me, tapped my foot under the table, and said, "Rachel and I are engaged." You would have thought we'd announced we were joining the circus the way the air hung with incredulity before the excited gasps. And though he proposed months earlier, Bill and I could hardly believe the news ourselves. I wrote in an ecstatic scrawl in my journal the next day, I've entered a new era, one in which the murder is past, or almost. Was I ready to face my father's murder because I was getting married, or was I ready to get married because I'd begun to examine the murder? I only knew the two were connected, and that the need to learn all that I could about my father's death now felt urgent. And so I found myself giving my name at the sheriff's department's bulletproof reception window and waiting for a detective to open the locked steel door leading to his office. I wasn't on a mission to solve my father's murder or convict his killer. What I wanted was even more elusive, and unlike in an investigation full of leads to pursue, there were no clear steps to tracking it down. Perhaps I thought the detectives guarded all the answers I needed, that their case file held some magic decoder that would make sense of the little I knew about my father's death. They confirmed a few elements of the crime that had always felt too bizarre to be real, and gave me new pieces of information that left me even more bewildered. But they didn't present a definitive story of my father's death that I could live with, that I could hold in my mind as truth. I didn't recognize my story in the detective's bare-bone accounting, and I wanted to fill in the scenes their facts left out. I wanted to tell them about summer afternoons of happiness my father and I had shared, dancing to Maggie May in our cramped living room. The wiggle of his mustache as he winked at me in his janitorial van's rearview mirror. The triumphant smirk on his face when he crossed the finish line in our neighborhood 10K. I wanted to say all of that had ended with his third marriage. My father had changed in the months before the murder. He'd turned sluggish and controlling, and his love had come to feel more suffocating than protective. My story was still disconnected and inconclusive, but it was more revealing, I felt certain, than anything the detectives could share with me from their tightly clutched case file. The detectives weren't interested in hearing my story or in helping me assemble it. They nodded as I tried to condense the most telling scenes, took care to look me straight in the eyes and jot down a few notes. They shook my hand and asked, "Did you get what you were coming for?" I answered yes. I said I just wanted to hear the little that was known about the case myself. But in truth, my need ran deeper. I wanted to understand the facts of my father's murder in order to write about it, and I had to write about his death in order to understand it. Those drives were circular and inextricable as I tried to construct a past that would let me move into the future. But only I could live the second half of this story, and my father's murder wasn't behind me just yet. So that was last night. And let's see, after the last night, maybe, oh gosh, it was about a year after it came out. That was when I went back to graduate school and I did my MFA in Warren Wilson in fiction. And I actually feel that the short story for me is the very hardest form to write. So I wrote short stories there. I started a novel that I worked on for about 8 years total that was never published. I then in 2015 was the last time I was here. I was a visiting writer at St. Mary's. It was extremely generative time for me to be at table with great writers, just really getting into the pages, and it was really inspiring and reset me. And it was the next year, 2016, that came to me all at once. Maybe I'll share the story later. I shared it with my grad class a few weeks ago, how it came to me one night, and I drove down to a party, and I didn't go into the party. I went into a closet next to the party and wrote it down so I wouldn't lose it. And I started this novel. I wrote it in about 8 months, and then, of course, there was some revision with editors, and it came out in 2019. So this is a novel. It's called The Risk of Us. This is the opening. It starts with a face in a binder. "Children available," reads the cover. The recruitment brochure for this foster services agency says they need families that, quote, "take risks." But I won't notice this language until it's too late. And even if I'd noticed it at the start, I would have taken it as a pat on the back. You, though, you see everything as a warning. You scrutinize the flyers in the binder, search the faces for signs, read between the lines. He looks sweet, I say. A boy like that, I think we could help him. Sexual abuse, you say. How would he ever trust me? Turn the page. The pictures remind me of the advertisements for abandoned dogs in the shelter where I volunteered back in another life. Older than 7, we've deemed untenable, which means every teenager's smile punctures any temptation to feel virtuous. It's so unfair, the older ones don't have a chance, I say. It's awful, you say. You mean it. You've turned pale. Your bleeding heart, literally and figuratively, it weakens you several times daily. The reason I married you. We want the child to have a chance of bonding with us, you say. It's an apology, not an explanation. We've been over this too many times. You made a chart, name, date of birth, county, positives, concerns. You stop on a girl with big glasses. I read, Alice would like to be placed with a family that eats organic produce. I like that. She looks smart, that Alice. You're trying out her name. But Alice is 9, so we turn. To a brown-haired gremlin with arms flung like she could fly off the page. Is that Marisa, we say, or Marissa? The girl beside her has the same brown eyes and brown hair, but she's composed, forgettable. Or is that just the 1.5 years since we saw her photo as I write this, erasing incipient love? Jennifer and Marisa are adorable 8- and 6-year-old sisters. They love dance class, singing, and making art. Your mouth puckering in thought. The agency said we could have 2 of the same sex in one room. My pulse rising at what you don't say. The older girl's 8. Names and dates of birth at the top of the list, slip of paper handed to the receptionist. In your handwriting, a special note, highly interested. You may be the careful one, but you've got your risky side. Saying I love you back when I blurted it after 3 weeks. Following me from San Francisco to North Carolina after 3 months. Marrying me there after 6. Supporting me when I wanted to quit the only college teaching job I'd ever managed to land and go back to California. Signing a mortgage on a house in the foothills, praying our freelance gigs would keep coming even though we'd be hours up Route 80 from the Bay, because how else would we ever afford that second bedroom? The difference with you know the risks are real, whereas I can't quite conjure danger, blithe, some might say. You prefer to say, I have an optimistic imagination. Failure of imagination might apply too. Not long after we write the unpronounceable name, I go for a beer with another writer, rare creature in our new GMC driving, flag-flying town. You commended me for networking, but what I want in this alien land of live oaks and ponderosa pines is a friend. His perfect baby is home sleeping with his wife. I talk the whole time about the girls in the binder, about waiting to hear. Try not to burden him with details of a labyrinthine bureaucracy. Just say, we've been specially chosen as a home offering permanency, though finalizing can't be guaranteed. He applauds what we're doing, says it sounds risky. Maybe this isn't the kind of question I should ask, he starts, but what if, you don't click? I explain how the first meetings will go, how the girls supposedly won't know, though how could they not, that we're scouting. I mean, beyond that, he says, and I brace myself with another sip of beer. Not to be callous here, but technically you'll still be foster parents until the final adoption, right? So, oh, I say, well, we're supposed to be offering unconditional love. Meaning, I'm not even going to imagine what you're suggesting. The week after we hand the names to the receptionist, we drive down to the city. Oh, elaborate life riggings of the so-called creative class. You've kept your adjunct job near the bay, teaching art where we can't afford to live, renting a basement 2 nights a week from a friend. Oh, fleeting freedom of the childless freelancer. On a whim, I join you for the commute, heading to my old haunt, the cathedral on the hill, while you ride transit to your college. O refuge of my angst-filled 20s. Echoing footfalls, aftertaste of incense, kneeling for Wednesday morning prayer with 3 strangers and the priest, who 15 years ago sprinkled water on my forehead. Wandering to the Southside Chapel as the bells toll a new hour, kneeling beneath a carved face that seems to gaze down into mine, and noticing to my left, corkboard, thumbtacks, slips of paper. One prayer scrawled for the teenagers in the binder. On a second prayer slip, I write the names, Jennifer and Marisa. The cell call comes as you're driving us back to the land of trucks and pines. I put it on speakerphone. The sisters no longer live together. The older girl is with people who want to adopt her. The younger girl is in what they call a therapeutic temporary foster home, waiting for what they call a forever family, us. The 6-year-old, 7 actually, she just turned. It's a shame they're already split, you say. We would have gladly taken both. They were separated, we learned, because they were fighting. Oh, sisters, we say. Well, apparently the girls are calmer when apart, says the voice on the speakerphone. The voice of God, who is female, makes sense to me, with a determined uplift at the end of each sentence. We are hardly breathing, we should probably pull over. The fields outside flying past. Marisa, or is it Marissa? Says the speakerphone. She hit her teacher with the cast on her broken arm back in the spring. And it looks like there were a few incidents with the current foster mom. The voice is reading this docket for the first time, trying to find the right tone with each line. The girl pulled the foster mom's hair while the foster mom was driving on the freeway. Oh, eeks. So hard they almost crashed. Later, they'll lump it all as mild aggressions. But I took down specifics because that's what I do, because specifics are my faith. We were different people back then when I wrote those notes a year and a half ago. No longer in the first blush of marriage, not knowing what the final shape of our marriage would be. I hung up and felt the velocity of the family-appropriate Subaru we'd just acquired flying past the fallow fields. It was late in the year. We were heading toward winter, our backyard garden withering. She is only the first child we've asked about, you say, and I turn back to the window. I'm thinking not of the tomato plants I raised from seed, now rotting into blackened vines, but the seedlings in plastic trays that shriveled right after sprouting. But don't you think they'll all be a little bit angry, I say? Wouldn't you be? So that's the beginning of The Risk of Us. Okay, I'm going to read just a little bit from what I'm working on now. So after that book, I wrote another manuscript actually that is done, but I don't think I'll be publishing it for about another 5 years. And so there's work in between. I feel it's important to write something when you can write it, and even if it has to be private. You know, you feel a moment when something is available to you, and it may not be later. So that's what happened in my life. And then there's been another work that I'm working on. It's a memoir. So, yeah, as Alicia said, I write about a lot of difficult things, father's murder, but I'm actually writing about something quite lighthearted now, which is, so that's why I wanted to finish with that. I'm writing about a piano bar in Oakland that is 93 years old. It's on Grand Avenue. It's called The Alley. You like The Alley?
I love The Alley.
Okay, I'm going to sing with you there. So what happened in my life is, so the first husband from the memoir that I started with, The Lost Night, no longer married to him. So like I said, this might be humbling walking through my works of my life as you become different selves. But before we split up, I went to the cathedral with him one day and I was singing and we walked out, and of course we were in rocky times, but he said, oh, it's a good thing that the sound in that space doesn't really carry. And I was like, oh, why? I was like, you're a terrible singer. And I thought, you know what, he he tells me the truth. Like, this is part of our pact with each other. It's like, we're super honest with each other. So when I first walked into the alley when I was getting divorced, no way I was gonna sing. And I was like, what the hell am I doing in this place? It's a really interesting environment inside. There's 9 decades of old posters, drawings, business cards, garbage, rotting dolls tacked up to the walls. And I was like, what am I doing here? But I'm really fascinated by the people who are singing over at that piano, because they just sit at the piano. There's a guy in the middle. He looked ancient already. He played the piano there from 1960 to 2017 when he died, Rod Dibble. And he just sat in the middle there playing the piano, and the microphone went around. And so I went and I lurked there for about 2 years before I crept over to the piano, and then one day made my debut. And it was completely life-changing. So it's a lighthearted book in some ways, but weirdly, there's serious stuff in it for me, because kind of the thesis behind it is that our society really needs to rediscover ways to be physically together, to be vulnerable with one another, and to be at table with a wide range of all kinds of people. And that happens in lots of different places. It happens in, roller derbies, and it happens in, sports clubs sometimes, and it definitely happens there. So that was kind of the thesis behind it. Another thesis behind it that is more personal is that place actually became for me a personal religion. Like, I actually think there were ways in which my spirituality became more true there than what I had been practicing at the cathedral. So there's this idea of, like, what is true religion? Could it be something that seems not sacred at all? Could it be something that seems profane? And then I've been talking a lot with my graduate students and my undergraduate students about, like, the driving question at the heart of a work, and how it holds it together, and how it helps you find the arc, and how your sense of that, like, deepens and shifts over your process of creating the work. So for me, where I stand right now revising this work, I realized I think the driving question is actually, how do you accept that everything passes? Because that's actually, like, what draws us into religion, and that search for a deeper meaning and a need for connection. And then also that place is, like, it's such an interesting what it's holding, right? Because everything there is rotting, but it also seems like that place is never going to die. Like, it's dead and it's never going to die, but it is going to die. And Rod Dibble, the piano player, he did die, and is carrying on for now, but everything is going to change form. Everything that we know is constantly changing form. So anyway, that's my sense at the moment of what's at the center of it. So I'm going to read this section. This is, I first walked in there in 2006. This is from 2009, and I've made my debut there. I'm just kind of still, like, playing around, like, am I really going to keep coming here and singing? What's up with this? Okay, so this is 2009. The chapters are titled after songs that people sing there. And so this one is called It's Not Easy Being Green. Those hypnotizing pocket phones with their fancy cameras, they have new uses. This is the year the city wakes on New Year's Day to grainy footage. A group of men, boys really, slouching against the concrete wall of the BART station. The police, legs wide, chest stiff, belts loaded. A boy on his knees lifts his hands, pleading. The news channels tell us what we're seeing. Officers maneuvered the man to the ground, with one officer near his head, another at his back, a third officer standing nearby. There appears to be a brief struggle. From the crowd on the train and in the station, you can hear shouts, confusion, calls for the police to stop. The kid is face down. Then, a 2-year veteran BART officer stands, draws his weapon, and fires. It's all recorded on the phones. Over and over the footage plays. The people of Oakland can see for themselves. The kid was on the ground. The white cop was taking out his gun while the kid was on the ground. The white cop shot him, a young man and a father, Oscar Grant. Far from the first of the names, and far from the last. 700 people at the Fruitvale BART station that night. Downtown aflame with pepper spray and protesters. All around Lake Merritt, we hear the shouts, the sirens, we feel the helicopter blades striking the air. The same city that rang out with joy 2 months ago when Barack Obama won the presidency. The city that holds the country's complicated realities as the silent moon shines on the lake. I love the bar most on Tuesdays. I go in early those nights, get there even before Rod and his tiny wife Linda. I take the stool in the corner against the wall with its 100 of yellow business cards, that tattered old picture of naked Marilyn Monroe, head tossed back, body an ecstatic Z tacked behind the keyboard. How many decades has that tattered Marilyn shone orgiastically from that wall? Tuesdays are the slowest nights. There is no more peaceful feeling than sitting next to the bar as steaks sizzle on the kitchen's galley's grill, as Jennifer the barmaid gives her husky laugh and the ancient cash register dings as the smell of dirty floorboards and whiskey sours combine. There is no more perfect rightness than to anticipate the moment Rod will shuffle in with his belly pushing against a faded Berkeley High t-shirt, face grim, until he spots me next to the keyboard. Mouth opening wide, spiky gray hair lifting, the wrinkles on his forehead spreading to reveal pale crevasses beneath the surface. He's got his Pete's coffee. He lifts the gate that lets him slide into the cramped space between the piano, the wall, and the big black box of a sound system that hangs next to his head, his office. Open for business, he asks. Sometimes when Rod starts his shift on Tuesdays, I'm the only patron. I know the crowd will accumulate by 9:30 or 10. The rowdy stuff will come, the boogie-woogie, the joke songs like Hannah with their naughty tongue twisters. All day long she sits and shifts and sits and shifts and sits and shifts. But when it's quiet like this, Rod will start with a ballad. So many aching songs I've never heard before, the keys blooming with chords as his scratchy voice floats above. When the deep purple falls over sleepy garden walls and the stars begin to flicker in the sky. Or sometimes it's a song I know, but I've never heard it this way. It's not easy being green. Later, when the regulars walk in, I know their names. Dave and Sally, the couple in their 70s. Dave's usually wearing a hat, likes to croon "I've got you under my skin" and belt Unchained Melody. His wife, Sally, gray curls framing small, shy eyes, checks in with everyone at the piano like a grandmother getting updates at the family reunion. She never sings, except one number. Rod makes a big show of calling her over for it. Shouts out, "Come on, Sally!" She holds the mic close to her chest like she's guarding a secret. Her husband presses up next to her, supplying the harmony. I don't know why I love you like I do. I don't know why, I just do. Then there's Thimby, the curly-haired chanteuse. Carla, the 50-something blonde with a husky alto who brings her standard poodle Figaro and keeps him under the piano. There's Dan, who pulls out his harmonica, and Steve, who plays saxophone solos. There's the other Dan, puppy leather jacket, singing When Sunny Gets Blue or Autumn in New York. There's Norman, an actor and director. His hair cut close now, but in the pictures on the wall from 15 years ago, he's still wearing his old afro atop a dreamy expression as he gazes across the piano. Norman's the one who usually leads the Blue Moon sing-along. I especially love seeing Tony, a Mel Torme-type white guy in his 40s, tall and strapping, member of the East Bay Gay Men's Chorus, given to belting My Way or cajoling Rod into indulging his alternate lyrics version of Memory. Midnight, I wake up and remember that I left the door open with the groceries outside. Where the hell did I put my keys? Oh, look, here they are, underneath the TV guide. Tony, who caught me coming in a third night in a row, wrapped an arm around my shoulders and whispered, "You're one of us now." And my heart beat faster. What the hell am I doing with my life? Then there's Paul Rose. He comes every Thursday, and the other regulars make a special point of coming on Thursdays just to hear Paul. Later, I'll learn that Paul was the regular 2 decades earlier who put together those big plastic binders of lyrics stored in a bin under the piano, the books that always end up splayed atop Across the Top by Night's End. That Paul revised the lyrics books over the years too, adding songs Rod wanted people to learn, taking out the songs Rod tired of playing. Of course, Paul himself never uses the lyrics books because he always has his lyrics memorized. And every Thursday he sings at least one song most people have never heard, then teaches everyone the history of it, the songwriter and lyricist, the show the song originated in, as Rod rings the bell. Sometimes the songs are naughty, like the Yo-Yo song. But sometimes the songs are aching and serious. I've got it bad, and that ain't good. Comic or tragic, Paul finishes every song laughing. It reminds me of something Dean Allen Jones repeated in one of his last sermons at the cathedral, a quote from Wendell Berry. "Be joyful, though you have considered all the facts." Eventually, I became more aware of the non-joyful facts. Paul Rose, other regulars would inform me after his death from cancer in 2019, was one of the first African Americans to integrate Stanford University, one of just 8 Black students admitted in 1962. Paul grew up with a relatively wealthy family in Cleveland, the Stanford Alumni Magazine reported. His high school counted 1,600 students, only 30 of them Black. Integrating Stanford was a lonely business. So, I imagine, was hazarding a visit to the alley back in the 80s. Later, Norman, the director-actor, would tell me that when he first walked into the alley in 1996, he saw Paul singing and knew the bar was a safe place for him. Other regulars, however, taught me that the alley hadn't always been that way. Old Jody Kerr, the hard-ass owner who died in the 90s, wouldn't hire Black workers back in the 70s and 80s. One night, looking for footage of Paul singing, I rewatched a film about the alley and noticed in a photo from the early 60s, a painful detail. The photo is astonishing. Rod Dibble is smooth-skinned and Brill cream slicked, wearing a pink striped seersucker suit with a skinny tie. A similarly slick and handsome white man, a former lover, is sitting close to him on the piano bench. Behind Rod hangs the same Marilyn Monroe pinup that graced Rod's office when I walked in. But there's something else among the decor's layered flotsam. Is that really? Oh my God, it is. Hanging right above Rod's head, that black and red X, a small Confederate flag. How long did it fly? Was it hanging above the piano, I wonder, when Paul Rose first walked in? I know none of this as Rod Dibble finishes his opening ballad and Paul Rose launches into his first Cole Porter song of the night. I'm thinking, the alley can keep me sane while I finish this novel. And that's what I write in my journal the next morning. Then I return to my desk, pushing through paragraph by paragraph. And I'll finish there.
It was so good to hear you read. Yeah, and I love the new work. I love the alley. It was like I was there. I remember during the pandemic, they had a GoFundMe for, I was like, please take my money, stay open. I want to start with The Lost Night, which we gathered from what you read in the prologue, that you went into that book, I don't think like imagining that you would solve anything in the traditional sense, especially in like the genre of true crime that I feel like relies so much on like these neat narratives and closure and all that. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to write against genre in that way, and if you received any pushback from your publisher ever, or pressure, you felt like pressure to maybe turn it into a story that it wasn't?
So that book really just emerged from I really had to write that story. I mean, I've been trying to write that story since I was like 17 years old and putting it on like a secret disc back when we had floppy disks. And then there was the whole memoir boom. And I had been writing, I tried to write about it as fiction, and it just did not work or make any sense that way, because I would have to make up some idea of what actually happened in the murder, and I had no idea. And really the whole reason for writing it was, trying to reckon with having no idea. It just wasn't working that way in fiction. But then during the memoir boom, my ex-husband was with me in a bookstore, and he pointed to this table of memoirs, and he's like, there's all these memoirs coming out. Your father was murdered, you could write a memoir. And then that's kind of what Anne said to me too. So yeah, I guess right there's already the whole kind of true crime thing built into it, and our culture's fascination with unsolved murders and with violence, which was never, I never wanted to write a true crime. I didn't read true crime. I wasn't interested I didn't watch. I mean, I actually was like the opposite, because having lived through a murder, the last thing you want to do is see it on television and have it treated as entertainment. So I guess I got kind of lucky through the process in some ways, that I had an agent who definitely saw it as like a true crime angle was why it was sellable, but it connected with an editor who loved it for the family story. And fortunately, my sense of that after I spoke, and I actually think there were a couple editors who wanted it, and they all connected with the family story. So whatever it was really trying to be, I think, was already in the scenes and the pages, and it was already bringing editors who wanted to work with that. So that was lucky. And my editor was great about, when I got to a point where I was like, I'm not gonna know what happened in this murder, and I'm at a point where I just want to say I don't care anymore if I know what happened. And she said, then you have to be true to that, and there's other reasons that you're writing this story and we're reading this story. So that was fortunate. I don't know if I could have done anything otherwise. Like, I think a lot of being a writer is like just being this person the kind of person where there's just things you will not do. Like, you just feel it inside yourself and you're like, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't care how many people tell me to do that. Like, if you have that instinct inside yourself, then that's a very good thing for writing. So I don't think I could have done otherwise. But definitely then, they want to know how to categorize your books, so they put true crime on it as a label. And then, there were kind of visual elements. Actually, the first cover that came back was super true crime. And I told them, no, that I can't live with that. And so they brought me back another one. So yeah, it was always still there in the framing. But then what you're doing as a writer is, that's the culture bringing that to you, and you keep calling it out. And then what you do as a writer is, things are being framed one way, and you say, no, let's stop, let's reframe this. And the culture's going to keep bringing it to you, and you're just going to keep trying to do that. So in the end, I'm happy with what's inside the book. And then what happens outside of that is a wild and crazy ride.
Going back to what you said in your answer about that quote of like, oh, you can write a memoir from Anne, and also I think that just hearing you talk about that before you're reading, like, I think so often when I say that I'm working on a memoir, or hear other people be like, oh, like, she's working on a memoir, it's almost like, what story do you, especially when you're like young, or like what kind of almost like what right do you have, I guess, to like write in that genre? And so I guess I'm curious. I mean, as you say, like, that was very much a story for a memoir. But I guess maybe for those of us who are who don't have those stories, or might still be writing in that genre, and kind of coming up against that kind of preconceived notion of the genre, and like what it means to be writing a memoir. Yeah, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I do, because I'm back in writing a memoir right now, and it's a different publishing landscape than it was when my book first came out. And like I was saying, it was a big memoir boom at that time, and now there are a lot of articles and commentaries out how it's the opposite right now, and I'm sort of listening to that too. In a way, though, artistically, I mean, I'm not just saying this, it really is an opportunity, because it really then becomes about the writing itself. So I don't know if you all are like this, but the reason I keep writing is that I don't like going to parties very much. I'm not very good with socializing with many people at one time. I'm not very good at like I'm not a great person at a party. Unless you get me in the corner and we get into a really interesting conversation. I'm really good one-on-one. And so that's what I love about writing, right? Is on the page you can make this space, and you make that space through the words themselves, and it happens in those first sentences, and every word in those sentences matters to make that space, and you make that space where you can say, we're having this intimate conversation, right? And if you do it right, you bring the reader that you want to connect with, which is not all readers necessarily, it's like Osip Mandelstam said, like you're sending a letter in a bottle out on the ocean and seeing who finds it. But you're creating that space for a really intimate conversation, and that's what we're doing now. So it does mean that when people ask you what you're writing, I don't know, I never want to talk to people really about what I'm writing. So I don't know if maybe it's easier if you say you're writing a novel and you say, I don't know, if you say you're writing a clear genre. I know if someone else out there has an easier time with this question when people come up to you about what you're writing, let me know. But maybe you have to be extra protective in memoir these days. But then when it's you and the page, right, it doesn't really matter, because if you can get someone in with that first sentence, that second sentence, that paragraph, right, if you're creating that space, the writing is going to make it matter. And that's just always true across times and trends, and so.
Yeah, that reminds me of, that's similar, I guess, to what you were saying too about what we have control over when you're talking about like how The Lost Night was going to be framed outside of like you have control over, you only have so much control over a writer as a writer, like that's where the real work is. Does anyone have a burden question in the audience? Yes.
I probably don't need a microphone.
Okay.
That's hilarious. Yeah, but I had a question about The Risk of Us. I was really drawn into reading it because I'm working on a novel about a character who is aging out of the foster care system, and it's such a difficult topic to write about, and I was really wondering where you got your research.
Well, my husband and I did adopt a child out of the foster care system, so I had a lot of experience right at hand. Although not everything in that novel corresponds to my life. From being in it, it is a really difficult topic. And I've been in it recently too. It's so hard. I don't know what I can answer about. I was really deeply in it, so that was my research. I don't know if I have other resources besides that, except that I will say there's a foster youth museum based out of Oakland, and it's run by actual people who aged out of the foster care system, and they do have a nonprofit status, and they've done some exhibitions, including one exhibition did actually make it into a scene in The Risk of Us. They did an exhibition at Grace Cathedral of just items from people's lives, teenagers who aged out of foster care, and really telling their stories with complete honesty and really concrete details. So that would probably be a good organization to reach out to, the Foster Youth Museum. And they're right, they're in Oakland. I hope that they're still doing okay after the pandemic. I haven't checked in about a year.
Thank you. Yeah.
I have a question about just what you get out of the writing processes. Whenever I write, usually I would say, I guess, poems. It feels like a chore to me because I have to try to find descriptions of things and details. I look up words in the dictionary. I try to come up with metaphors and similes. It feels like a chore because I have to figure out so much. I'm overwhelmed with all the decision making. But what emotions do you get when you write poems or stories?
Okay. So I love that question because to me, poets are these people, I've said this to other people, they are on the highest plane to me. And I think that poetry is, I think it's so hard to write. I write prose that I would say verges on poetry. Maybe I sort of protect myself though, I just have this esteem for the poets and I don't go there. I will say though that what you're describing, you're probably doing good work that you should stick with, because I think that writing is about learning to tolerate discomfort, and it's one of the best meditative practices on the planet because of that. Like you said, you're overwhelmed by the decisions, right? There's so many decisions. And if you're looking up words and you're looking up information, that's fantastic. And that's part of the process too. And then sitting with that discomfort as you bring it back to the page. One tip I will say is that I love to write first physically on a page instead of on a screen, because having a screen and the illusion that it's typeset, right? It looks like a finished product and you're feeling like you can email it off, right? That's not very helpful. It compounds that. So definitely writing freehand and letting yourself be really messy helps. The other thing that I love when I'm getting to a point where it's too much discomfort, but I need to keep my practice going, is I love to borrow other people's decisions. In terms of stealing their structure, or stealing someone's first line and writing on from there, or doing a really specific prompt. There's a book of prompts that I love called, Naming the World. It's great. It's like all different prompts by different writers. So like taking some of the decision making off yourself and choosing some things at random that are already decided for you and working from there can make it more of a game that feels fun to play and keep you in it and kind of build up your ability to tolerate the discomfort. I don't know if that helps. But I think you're probably doing a great job that you should stick with.
Thank you.
In terms of like memoir writing, I know people talk about the distance you need to have, like time, like certain time needs to pass so you can like look at the things that have happened in your life with a different lens. And I guess as someone like in their 20s, like, is there any advice that you would give in terms of trying to get that distance, but also feeling like I want to write about it now? But being like, do I really know everything because maybe not that much time has passed? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I bet you can write about it now. It's just going to take some different forms, or it might be in fragments and you're not sure yet what the final form is going to be. I wouldn't say don't wait until you think you have like the perfect interpretation of it, or you know exactly now what the story is and what it all meant. The story will actually be dead at that point. So right where you are with it now, and again about tolerating the discomfort, just know it may not find its final form for a long time, or you might write about it in smaller freestanding forms and just let those things hold one sliver of the larger story for now. And then gradually, through doing that, you will get to the place where you may be able to pull it into a bigger, a longer narrative, right? It may be that maybe you haven't, like I was saying with my book, I hadn't actually even lived some events that I needed to live to feel that I had reached the end of the narrative. You might start to be able to tell if you go ahead and let yourself start just being in it and staying in it. I had another thought related to that, but I've lost it for now. The other thing I'll just say is that there's no formula, right, to how much time you need relative to the intensity of the story. So you can't know. Yeah. I love the Kierkegaard quote I always come back to, right, is life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. So you just take that risk every day of coming back to your writing practice, knowing that the discomfort is okay, and knowing that form is always evolving.
That feels like a perfect place to end. Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Rachel, so much for being here. It was so nice to do this.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.